On the night shift tonight, the one and only Mr. John Cleese, who's such a gentleman, to come into our studios.
Why are you accusing me of being a gentleman, Mark?
I'm sure, well, I've heard, to the contrary, but yeah. You're in town, of course, for a one-man show coming up at Dubai Opera. And I've got to ask you about the title because, I've been chatting around the office and you look fit and fine to me. And I think there's many, many more years in you. But it's called An Evening with the Late John Cleese. Tell me.
Right. Well, I had a tour a few years ago in Canada, and somebody suggested we should call it Last Time to See Me Before I Die. Oh. And then I went back a few years later, and people said they were very disappointed I was still alive. So
well, we
I thought I'd better die. So actually, I died nearly 2 weeks ago.
Oh, right. Okay.
So this will be the first show that I've done since I was dead.
Right, okay. Well, we look forward to that. A very spiritual evening, I'm guessing. So tell me what the content of the show is all about.
Well, I don't know yet, Mark, because I always choose the content to suit the audience.
Yeah.
I mean, people start making speeches without thinking this, but if you ever got to address a group of people, the first thing you do is you think, well, what sort of people are? What age are they?
Yeah.
Well, do they speak English? Are they conservative or progressive or whatever the word is? Because you have to take that into account before you can figure out what material to use. And I've been doing stage shows now for about 15 years, a lot of them with my daughter. Yeah. And so I've got so much material that when the stage manager runs the whole show for me at Rise, Andy Kurd, who's a lovely young guy, he's only early 30s, we've been working together for 10 years, I should say to him, now, what did I do last time? As we were right, we won't do that.
Yeah.
Now, is the audience going to like the stuff about hotels? Because some audiences stay in hotels and know what happens, and they love that routine. Mm-hmm. But if you do it to a younger audience, then they don't stay in hotels, so it's a little bit mysterious to them.
Okay.
So you tailor the material to the audience you're going to entertain. But it'll be silly and naughty.
As one would expect.
As one would expect. I don't like to be too well behaved, even at my age.
I want to ask, when you realised that comedy was your thing, that this was going to be your career. I mean, was it at school? Were you the funny guy in school? Or did it come later on, perhaps with writing?
I think it came about 4 years ago.
Right.
You've
been trying to make people laugh all the time.
Oh, well, yes, I have, but I've been doing that to make money, and I've done other things. For example, I helped a very distinguished psychiatrist to write 2 books on psychology, which I did really to give myself an education in psychology. Now, no other comedian's done anything as stupid as that.
No.
And I had a company for nearly 10 years, excuse me. I'm sorry, a company for nearly 20 years that taught management and sales and customer relation skills. Well, that's another sort of thing that comedians do.
No.
But I'm not just a comedian, and I've got other interests, and that's true of all comedians, but people sort of try and put you in a single box, and they're surprised if you
Those sales videos, I've actually been to one. I used to work in a music shop selling pianos.
Oh, did you?
And they took us off to a weekend retreat, and all the videos were you teaching people how not to sell and how to sell.
Really
hilarious.
Interesting, If you sit down with somebody who really knows how to sell, and they tell you this is how you sell, then when you get with a salesman, you think, now, is this guy any good, or is this girl any good?
Yeah, I mean, when you look back on your career, John, what are some of the real standouts? I mean, I'm reading you've been in James Bond movies, in Harry Potter movies, and of course all your amazing Monty Python and Fawlty Towers stuff. What are you most proud of?
Proud? Well, I don't know, really. I think Fawlty Towers was very, very good, and I thought Connie and I wrote a really good series. Now, when I watch it now, I'm always surprised how good the acting is.
Yeah.
Because at that point in British history, we had the most extraordinary array of great comedy actors, and it didn't seem to matter who we invited in for that week. They were always absolutely top class, especially Bernard Cribbins.
Yeah. I mean, I always loved the scene with the lady looking out of the window and she's unhappy with the view. too.
Yeah, Joan Sanderson. She's such a darling. Actually, she played my wife in a Muppet movie too, so we knew each other.
Really?
Yeah. But I think making Fish Called Wanda was a very, very happy experience. I adored being in the Bond films, although I was in 2 Bond films, which meant I did 4 days filming of Bond over 4 years. And yet that's really where I'm known for. If I go to the Caribbean, they've never heard of Monty Python.
Who was the Bond that played?
Pierce.
It was Pierce Brosnan.
And I liked him so much. And he was such a great guy to work with because totally professional, but very relaxed and nice because, the best people are.
Yeah. So your one-man show is going to be happening on March 18th at Dubai Opera, but I believe you're also doing some creative talks whilst you're here.
You see, I did a very standard English education. I was good at maths and Latin because they were logical and I could learn rules. I was hopeless at history and religion and French and all of those.
Okay.
But ever so slowly I began to discover I was creative. So I started studying it, and then 60 years later I wrote a book about it.
Who were some of your influences? Because I've been reading The Goon Show was a big influence on you,
huge.
Which was legendary, wasn't it, on radio?
Oh, everybody. And all the Pythons were crazy about the Goons. And I wrote 3 films for Peter Sellers, and I wrote sketches for Harry Seacombe, and I knew Spike Milligan a bit. They were my great heroes.
Yeah.
But then there were others. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Steve Martin. He did a movie called Roxanne. And another one called Bowfinger, which I think are 2 of the very best films we've made the last few years, because I don't think the comedies out there at the moment are very good. And I think it's largely because they're made for young males, young American males, because they go to the cinema on Friday night, which is what determines whether the film is going to be viewed as a hit or not.
Yeah. You also worked with one of my favourite comedians growing up, and that was Les Dawson. What an amazing comic.
Well, if anybody wants to see a really funny sketch, go on Twitter. Go and watch my Twitter yesterday. There's a sketch of me and Daz. I hadn't seen it for 140 years, and it's really funny.
Yeah. What was he like to work with?
Oh, well, he was lovely. He was very interesting, you see, because he came up, he was northern working class, and he came up through the clubs, which is a very hard way to earn a living, those northern
the working men's clubs.
Oh, they were tough. In fact, Les once said to me, he said, if I wasn't doing television, I'd never go back to the clubs. It was too hard.
Yeah.
But somehow I thought he was terrific. I remember he used to do these routines. He said, he said, I wanted a glass of water, so I knocked on the door. I said, and the woman answered it. She had a face like a bag of chisels. I said, do you think the man next door would give me a cup of water? He used to do these very zany routines that were really anchored in North Country working class stuff.
He was one of those guys, wasn't he, that, was a funny man. You didn't have to say a word and you would laugh. A bit like Eric Morecambe.
He loved words. He loved words, and he played with them in a way. Oh, Eric Morecambe was a genius, yes.
Yeah, and I always remember that movie, The Plank.
Yes.
Were you in that? No, you weren't.
No,
but an incredible.
Yes, Eric Sykes.
Eric Sykes.
Yes.
Jimmy Edwards.
You see, we had a fantastic array of comedians from the 50s through to the 90s, because you had all the guys who'd been in ENSA, the entertainment section of the army, and they'd all the ones who'd worked at the clubs in England, and the music hall, which produced some wonderful comedians like Frankie Howard.
Yeah.
And then in the late 50s, early 60s, you suddenly had people like Peter Cook.
Dudley
Alan
Moore.
Bennett.
Yeah.
And there was a tremendous respect from the university guys for all the musical people. We loved all their stuff. We all loved the Goon Show. So for about 40 years, we had this extraordinary amount of talent coming from every part of society, which there was a variety you couldn't get now. And then the BBC spoiled it all by inventing things called commissioning editors, and it all fell apart because it's a terrible idea. In my day, the people who were directing shows were people who'd worked on the floor as floor managers with Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett for 10 years. So when they got to direct, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know why the idea of commissioning editors came along, because it's a disastrous idea.
Yeah. Tell me about working with your daughter. That must give you a lot of satisfaction.
Well,
eh?
we started 16 years ago. I thought it would be fun if she came on a tour with me to New Zealand.
Yeah.
And then we had a little bit of fun and found we could write together. And the next thing I knew, she'd come up with a monologue based on the bizarre childhood she'd had, being the daughter of a slightly weird comic. And I remember the first time she went on stage in Invercargill in the south of New Zealand, where about half the audience were penguins. And she got every single laugh that she could have gotten. The very first time she'd ever been in front of an audience. And when she got to Wellington, the best critic in New Zealand said, she won't be known as John Cleese's daughter much longer. He'll be known as Camilla
father.
Cleese's father, yeah.
Yeah. It must make you so proud to see her kind of following in your footsteps.
Well, we just heard 2 days ago that a script we've written about the lookalikes on Hollywood Boulevard. It's just been received with something approaching ecstasy by a couple of companies. So I may be going there in the second half of the year with her to co-direct it.
Yeah.
Not to be in it.
There were a few headlines quite recently about a possibility that you might bring back Fawlty Towers in a different kind of, obviously a different era. But is that going to come to fruition, do you think?
I think so, yes. I mean, the Rob Reiner, who's the top guy at Castle Rock, a big studio. Castle Rock production company Rob is absolutely the tops. If you look at his credits, I think he's probably comparable with Spielberg, except that he does humor and Spielberg doesn't. And he loves the idea. But of course, it's nothing to do with the original. I mean, the only thing in common probably, or certainly, will be that Basil's in it, but nothing else is the same, which hasn't stopped several of the newspapers from saying it's going to be bloody awful, actually using the word bloody awful. But it's a new form of criticism, which is criticizing something that hasn't actually been written yet, and which you don't really know
you don't know
about.
What it's going to be
give
like.
it a bad review anyway.
Yeah.
That's the British press.
And once again, here in Dubai, what have you been getting up to? We're leading up to your show, of course, on the 18th. What do you like to do in Dubai?
Well, I spend a lot of time here working, but I can get more work done here than I would in London because I want to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So I've been doing a lot of writing for different things. I think I got 7 projects going at the moment. There's a stage show at Life of Brian. There's a musical of Wonder. There's the one that Camilla and I have just written called Lookalikes, and we got 2 TV series. There's a lot going on, and that means a lot of phone calls and a lot of those damned emails.
Yeah, right. Well, an evening with the late John Cleese. So maybe he'll be late for the show, perhaps, but I hope not. It's going to be happening once again on the 18th at Dubai Opera. Make sure you get your tickets ASAP, as they're going to be flying out there. And Creativity Talks. I'm
doing one at a creativity conference in a few days. It's an event I spoke at in Cannes in France about 10 years ago. But I'm fascinated by creativity because it's so important that kids understand it, and nobody wants to teach it to them. And the astonishing thing for me is I wrote a very good little book. You can read it in an hour. And the only people I can't get interested in it are educationalists.
Right.
And it completely floors me. I cannot understand it. But any time you can teach people how to have better ideas about how to do something, you have to be ahead of the game.
Yeah. John Cleese, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our radio show.
Nice to see
Thank you so much for coming in.
Dubai Eye 103.8.
Join the conversation.